Good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Mike Conklin. I'm the Director of College Counseling, and I'm glad to have you, and we're excited to be able to respond to a wide variety of your questions. I do want to remind everyone that while we received some questions in advance, there is a Q&A feature where you can enter your questions through the course of this presentation. So as we respond to and provide information, if additional questions arise, don't hesitate to push that to the Q&A so that we have an opportunity to address those questions. Well, tonight is really designed to be a Q&A. I thought it would be helpful to begin by offering just a quick update in terms of where we are with each of our classes, the class of 21 and class of 22. And so this was not necessarily conceived of as a presentation, but I'm going to provide that update, which may prompt some of your questions as well. And I'd like to start with the class of 22. So we first met with our 11th graders on September 28th for the first of our two college kickoff events. And this event was really about reviewing the college search timeline and framing expectations for our students. It's an opportunity for them to sort of conceive of the process in a big picture frame and from a big picture perspective, and allowed us an opportunity to kind of lay the groundwork for some meaningful work ahead. We'll meet again with the 11th grade class in November, on November 2nd, and that will be more procedural in nature. Students will be meeting with their respective college counselors to engage in a tutorial with Maya Learning, our college search and application management platform, to create a common application account, and ultimately to start taking steps toward entering the college search process in a meaningful way. We won't really begin meeting with our students individually until the winter term. That's the point at which we really begin to better understand their preferences and priorities and start to construct a college list. But we are excited to have the opportunity to engage with them multiple times through the fall term as a means of getting them started. Now, of course, the fall has been largely devoted to our senior class, who are in the midst of preparing and for some submitting applications. This year, for the first time, we've been very fortunate to be able to facilitate our senior seminar through XBlock, which I know many of you will be familiar with or have heard a bit about. Most of our XBlock sessions, our senior seminar, has been devoted to a range of common tasks. So we met twice in September to address some of those common tasks that students will need to complete as part of this process. And then at the end of September, on the 28th, met with Courtney Campbell, Senior Associate Director of Admission, to discuss personal essays and supplemental writing. She offered the perspective of a professional who's done this for quite some time and is widely respected, highly regarded in the profession. And had some wonderful advice. I've had a number of seniors come back to me since that point in time with revisions to their work that have been inspired by Courtney's input and insight. In addition to our senior seminar, of course, we're doing a great deal of work with our senior class individually in our individual meetings. And so rather than actually reviewing this list, I'd like to use this as a jumping off point for our Q&A, and I'll toss this first question to Stuart. But Stuart, can you talk to me about what it is that you're doing with your seniors at this point in time, and how it is that you're continuing to navigate the process with each of those students?
Sure. Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is that the kids in the senior class right now are all in very different places, and I think one of the challenges that we have in the office this fall is to kind of get them all on a level playing field and moving towards these deadlines, which aren't going anywhere, regardless of the last 6 to 8 months. So, in these individual meetings, it can be fairly procedural. It can be about reviewing the common application and making sure that each of those elements looks good. A lot of work on the personal statement, right, the main college essay. I find it far more helpful to sit down with kids and have a conversation about where they are with their writing than trying to do it over email. I can leave notes in Google Docs, but talking through what their intention is with an essay is certainly really helpful to hear where they're coming from. supplemental responses, whether or not to use their test scores this year, given that almost all universities and colleges are test optional. And then with other kids, we're still thinking about the big picture. Is there a college that we're missing? Is there a level of selectivity that maybe is a little thin in their list? I spent a half an hour with a parent this afternoon talking about application strategies. We were discussing their son's early decision application, but if that didn't go the way that they hoped, was there a second round of early decision in January, an ED2 that maybe they'd want to plan for? Or would their son hold off and just make use of the regular decision deadline to supplement the applications that he was submitting in November for early action and then that one early decision? So I would say right now, every meeting is different. I'd say the next couple of weeks, they're going to be much more about putting the kids into launch position for those applications, checking the supplement responses one more time, looking over the Common App, making sure they have mom and dad's credit card to pay the application fee. And then before you know it, November 1st will be here.
Great. Stuart, you made reference multiple times to conversations and the role of the parent ultimately in this process, right? So much of the work that we do is done directly with the student, but this is really a critical time for parents to be involved and to be informed about where their children are in the process. So I actually asked this question to both of you. How is it that parents can effectively engage at this point in the process? And in what ways are we providing information to them?
Austin, you want to jump in or you want me to start?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of things just as far as, and I can speak for my group, but I think this is fairly universal as far as engaging with parents. I mean, after every time I have a meeting with a student, the notes are going to go home. A copy goes to the student just to make sure that the sort of accuracy of everything we talked about, reflects what the student's experience is. And the other part of it is that it also goes to the parents. And, every year I've always got this group of parents that is great. And within a day or so after that, either it's sort of a thank you, which lets me know that they're engaged, and usually some good questions come out of this. And I would say also from my standpoint that, an engaged parent is great because it's clear that they're interested in the process, and it's clear they're following the process. And I would sort of say the other side of this is that a parent you never hear from occasionally makes me nervous, not in a bad way, but again, what I want is I just want to make sure that as this process moves forward, everyone really understands what's happening. And this is the line I use with all the families. College counseling is a three-legged stool. I mean, it's the school, it's the student, but absolutely it's the family. Because at the end of the day, that's the biggest level of support that, a student's going to have, both as far as the process and also when they transition to and enroll in college. So that's sort of my take on that. Stuart, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think responding to our emails when we send along the notes from the meeting is great. I have a number of parents who do that, picking up the phone or asking for a meeting just like this. We've been doing that pretty regularly since the shutdown last spring. And I don't think this format for communicating with parents will probably ever go away because it's just so efficient, right? Most parents can't be on campus regularly. You can get a lot done in a 20 to 30 minute Zoom call. So I would say staying in touch, especially before the applications go out, to make sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody's clear on what the process and the strategy is and the various layers of deadlines. And, I used an analogy today with a parent that their son's application process is almost going to be like a game of blackjack, right? They're going to play their cards, and then the first round of responses will come back the third week of December. And do they want to hold? Are they happy with what they have in those responses, or do they want to keep playing? Hit me again with a few regular decision applications and let's see what comes back in March. That gives us the month of April to make that final decision on May 1st. So, those are the conversations we're having with families this fall, Mike.
Yeah, you offer an interesting analogy, and I know that we put a great deal of time and thought into helping students to construct a balanced application plan, right? At the end of the day, what's the goal? For all the time and energy that our students invest in researching their college options and in balancing their list, at the risk of oversimplifying the process, what is the end goal for our seniors?
It's that one college, right? I say to kids, especially kids who start off with 25 schools on the list, I say, listen, you can only go to one of these. So let's get it down to a manageable number, because what I don't think a lot of students understand, and certainly where the seniors are right now, is that many applications come with hours of preparation, right? So anytime you're getting up over 12, 13, 14 schools, there's a real time and energy cost, because if there's supplemental responses attached to those applications, those supplements count, and they need to be as well done as possible. And so the back and forth, never mind the personal statement, the Common App, making sure everything looks good, answering the questions. If I could say one thing about what seniors usually say at the end of their process, it's that they underestimated the amount of time and energy it would take to submit those top 6, 7, 8 applications. So, making sure the list is reasonable, I think, is also a really important conversation.
Right, and Stuart, absolutely right. Agree with you 100%. I would say on the other side of it, or not on the other side of it, but in addition to that, what's the goal? The goal is for a student to have a list. And if it's a perfect world, they look at every single school on that list, and they can identify and they can articulate why that's a great fit for them and why they'd be excited to attend that university. And I have the conversation with students every year, that with the kids who really get it right, I say, you know what, I could put all these names in a hat, and we do a little drum roll and have the moment of truth, and you're going to pick one out, and that's the school you're going to go to. And if they did that and pulled it out, there should be a smile on their face, because they've done the work.
Yeah.
And they absolutely know what they're in for. And also to echo what Stuart was saying, that the challenge is time management, because with the more selective schools, once the oxygen gets pretty thin up there, it's incredibly subjective. And what we do want is we have really high achieving kids who are applying to these schools. We want to make sure that they really, really get it right, because in those applications, they're going to be poring over every single syllable, and the colleges are looking for, how has the student articulated, like, this is a great fit for me? And the converse of that is just fatigue. This is my 7,000th supplement and I'm just out of gas. I want to go deeper, and I want to go with greater understanding as opposed to breadth. That's my approach.
Yeah. I get nervous when I get the sense that the student is really only interested in 2 or 3 schools. And I know those schools are all highly selective. The applicant usually knows that as well. We make that clear. But, if your admit rate is under 20% and continuing to plummet as the deadlines pass, that's when I think the most important conversation is about the rest of that list. Are you as excited about the school with the 40% admit rate, or is that going to feel like a consolation prize to you? I'd say Mercersburg kids, if I had to generalize, they're very thoughtful. I've been very impressed over the years with the number of applications. When we crunch those numbers and we look at the average number of applications for the senior class, I think, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but the last couple of years it's averaged 7 or 8. To me, that's very healthy. But those 7 or 8, if they're all, as Austin said, first choice schools, pick them out of a hat, you're going to be great. That's a really healthy process. So while I was being a little bit flip when I said the goal is 1, I think the goal is, if it's an early decision and you get it, great. It is about 1. And then it becomes about choice. Sitting down in April with your counselor, with your parents, spreading out 3 or 4 or 5 offers and saying, I don't know which one to go to because they're all great. That is a fantastic process.
Austin, you made reference to fit, right? And we've been working with our seniors now for months on defining fit and identifying those criteria that are going to be most important to them and ideally most important to their families as well. And Stuart picked up on that thread in part by making reference to selectivity and admission standards as part of defining fit. But For those 11th grade students and parents who are just coming into this process, how do we work with them to define fit early on? Austin, you'll need to unmute.
That's a great question. To put it, not to oversimplify it, but it starts with a conversation. And again, every student's going to approach this a little bit differently. In some cases, if we want to kind of fire off a first round, it's geographical. There's one family I worked with, and they said, my child can apply anywhere they want, just as long as it's in the state of Virginia. Another family said they can apply wherever they want, just as long as it's a 6-hour drive, so that they can drive them there, drop them off, and drive home in the same day. And again, geography is a great place to start. The second thing is ask students, what do you imagine? What do you want your college to be like? Do you want a big school that's got, a giant stadium and everyone wearing green or red or orange or whatever, waving pom-poms? Do you want a smaller school? That you're going to be a little bit more known. You're going to know your professors. You're going to know, a lot of your classmates. And so we'll certainly look at size. The other easy one is just, do you want to be in a city? And again, there's advantages and disadvantages to that. Do you want to be close to a city? And so the list shrinks itself pretty quickly. And again, some students, as far as academic interests, are going to be really, really strong with this. And they'll say, what I'm really interested in, I think I want to do mechanical engineering. The kid who's been taking apart the toaster since he was in 6th grade. And, by 8th grade, they could put it back together and it works. So a lot of these things drive it. In some cases, and we've all had this experience where somebody will say, gosh, I really like history. And then it's sort of like, well, how about political science? Or, I've noticed you've taken French for 3 years. What do you think about international relations? And so, part of the fun of our job is really opening up the students' eyes to just, a small school will have 30 different programs and majors. A big school will have 200. And really just sort of going through some of those lists and saying, what's interesting to you? So again, through conversations and through the, what's interesting to you, what's not interesting to you, it is a little bit of sort of process of elimination. And again, in our role as counselor, we visit on a year in, year out basis, dozens of schools. And so for us, we can say, you want to do engineering, and how cool would it be to be on a solar dragster team? Did you know Purdue has one, and they've also got an airstrip and this, and this. And students go, I've never even heard of that. So again, that's kind of the fun and the joy of the process, is opening up kids' eyes to schools that maybe they haven't heard of, but are fantastic schools, and tick all the boxes for them. They just don't know that yet. So.
And Stuart, for you, when you're asking a student those questions, do you want to be in an urban setting? Do you want to be on a large campus or a small campus? For that student who may not know, who may not have the experience or the insight to be able to make an informed response to that question, how do you guide them through the early parts of this process and allow them to become familiar with the range of options available to them?
Yeah, it's as Austin said, it's actually my favorite part of the process, because all options are open, all variables are in play. And I think kids in general, right, kids who go to boarding schools like Mercersburg, they usually misinterpret size and scale. And so the kids who come in and they say, listen, I can't do this again. I don't want to go to a small college. They don't quite understand even the difference between 425 kids and 2,000 kids is significant. And so I'll still put a small college on their list, unless the programming just isn't there, right? The student who wants to be the mechanical engineer is probably going to need it to look at a larger, university with an established engineering program. But for kids who don't really have a sense of what the possibilities are, I think the fun is building that list and including a small college, a mid-range college. Maybe I think a safe bet is always their in-state university. Listening to the family about any geographic restrictions, family schools that are important to them. Some younger siblings have already been dragged around on college visits. They've been to a few campuses, and so they have a basic sense of what they're looking for. But I think some of the the really good work can happen fairly early in the process, where the family's going to visit a relative over Thanksgiving and happens to be near a university, and hey, let's just take a drive through. And this is what, hey, this is George Washington. Here we are right in the city. You'll notice there's not much of a quad or a campus. And then they're out in Ohio and they're driving through Kenyon, and here, oh, wow, that looks a little bit like Mercersburg. And so all of a sudden the picture starts to become clearer, and then you can really revise the list and evolve the list to reflect what it is that they're connecting with. And that could be programming, that could be size. I've been amazed this year at the number of students in my group who've sat down and said to me, listen, I want to be at a school where I can, paint my face and go to the football game. And that, that's actually important to me. School spirit, a fun, active campus on the weekend. And it's not that they're just looking for a party school. They want something that they can be a part of. And finding that with the programming that they want has been really satisfying. And I think that, my group in particular is applying to, I think, slightly larger schools than my group last year, because there's a number of kids who are just saying, I love Mercersburg, but I want to do it on a bigger scale. I just need a bigger canvas for the next 4 years. And who knows what next year's class will be. As we start working with them this winter, is there going to be any themes, any commonalities that come out in terms of what they think they might want? Chances are it'll change, right? We all laugh about the number of boys who sit down and say, I want to study business. And then you say, okay, well, there are about 10 different kinds of business majors. Are you accounting? Are you business administration? Are you economics? Are you finance? And you can see them. So, majors, I'd say, very rarely lead the search. It's usually about the peripheral factors. And then, especially for Mercersburg kids, dialing in a range of options and academic programs that they can explore, because as we all know, majors get changed on average. I don't know what the most recent number was, but at least 2 to 3 times. So trying not to back them into a corner. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, very, very helpful. I do want to, so I'm going to jump around a little bit here because we have some questions coming in, and at least one from an attendee that I know has to sign off pretty early. And it's a fairly technical question that I'll take on. And the question is with regard to the Marks Education Tutoring Program and when students will get started. The Marks Education Tutoring Program is really, students are divided between 2 cohorts. Cohort 1 are generally students who are in a more advanced level of math and have the content earlier in their experience here to begin preparing for those tests. And it's also determined in part by the 2 diagnostic tests that our students will take in preparation for that program, which would be the PSAT and a mock ACT, which is administered here on campus. So cohort 1 has actually just started scheduling their first round of meetings with their tutors at Marks Education. And most, well, there is some flexibility here. Most are doing so in preparation to test for the first time in December. And then cohort 2 will begin meeting with their tutors in December, shortly after the Thanksgiving break. Of course, all of these meetings will continue to be hosted virtually. And there's some flexibility there as well in terms of which test dates they'll be preparing for. And most of our students will sit for at least 3, perhaps 4 tutoring sessions before sitting for their first exam, after which their tutors will adapt the lessons to kind of address their strengths and weaknesses based on the results of that first test. So cohort 1 should be getting started shortly if they haven't started already, and cohort 2 will begin in December. Keeping with the theme of testing, I'm happy to toss this to you, Stuart, very quickly. You made reference early in the conversation about test optional if students are planning to submit test scores this year. If a student takes and submits his or her score, will the college take that score into consideration? And can you kind of speak a little bit about the evolution of test optional practices?
Yeah, Mike, are we talking this year right now with the seniors or in general?
Yes, I would say this year with our senior class. What is that? When a college says we're test optional, do they mean it?
Right. So really interesting, obviously, issue this year as over the summer, the colleges kind of one by one began dropping their testing requirements. I only know, you guys jump in if you know of another, I only know of 2 public university systems that are still requiring standardized testing. The first is the University of Florida, and the second is the state of Louisiana. So LSU, for example, both are still requiring it. And that's because the government can mandate that, right? Those are public universities, state universities, and they don't have the kind of discretion to drop the requirement on their own. On the other end of the spectrum, you had the University of California system, which was going to go test optional until a judge said, nope, you may not use them at all. And so I think the issue of testing is going to evolve over the next couple of years. I think a number of schools will continue to stay test optional because they're going to track these incoming students for the next 2 to 3 years, and they're going to discover that the grades, the success rate, the graduation rate is not going to be demonstrably different from the students who had submitted test scores that year or in previous years. This year, we are taking very much an a la carte approach. I would say it's a really interesting year for that because other than those two systems, our kids don't have to submit test scores. And that opens up a lot of possibilities. On the other hand, we know that more information about an applicant is always better than less information about an applicant. So to follow up with what you said, yes, test optional means test optional. The colleges signed an agreement with NACAC that they are not going to penalize students for not submitting test scores because access was just so poor the last 6 months. So they're going to read what they call holistically, and maybe we should talk about that in a bit, but it's certainly going to shine a spotlight on transcripts a little brighter. But if they want to submit test scores and the test scores are on profile or above profile with what the college or university has typically shown to be their test range, then our advice is yes, use them. Because again, they want to know more about a student than not. And so, there's been some anxiety about our October 24th ACT, for example, because those scores are not going to be back in time for a November 1st deadline. But colleges have been very public this fall about saying, if you get scores late in the game and you feel like they will support your application, then just send them. If we get them, we will use them. Even if you've checked the test optional box, they will still consider them. So our work as counselors this fall has been really customizing the application plan with each of our students. I'm thinking about a student I met with this morning, and she will submit her scores to one school where it's on profile, and the other 6, she's going to go test optional. So, I think it's very much a case-by-case basis this year, and I think one of the interesting things the next couple of years is going to be to track how this trends and where testing requirements go in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, and to sort of speak to the second part of that question, or maybe a different interpretation of the second part of that question, is if students do submit scores, they should prepare for those scores to be reviewed and included as part of their review. So if those scores are below profile, they will continue to be included as part of their review if the student elects to apply with the inclusion of their test scores. Now, I will say the Dean of Enrollment at George Washington University was on campus last spring and reminded our office and our families that they are trained to look for reasons to admit, right? And so if a student submits a score that's below profile, it's certainly not going to break their application. And the college is going to understand that in context and is going to review the remaining portions of the application with that context in mind. But students who do choose to submit should be prepared for those scores to be included as part of their review. Austin, we do have a question. We've spoken a little bit about selectivity and encouraging students to apply across a spectrum of selectivity. For students who are maybe having a hard time identifying a school that would be in the likely range that they feel strongly about, how important is it that they apply to a likely option? How do we encourage them to develop an affinity for and feel strongly about those likely options?
Yes, we bump into this a lot. And actually today I had a meeting with a student, and this was a really, really good example because this student had talked about a school on their list that was a likely, and they said they were considering dropping it, and the interest was there, but they just kind of thought, you know what, I'm going to get into a bunch of other schools and it's not that interesting to me. And in the case of this particular student, my thought was they should keep it on the list because this is a school that has historically been pretty good with financial aid. And so I said to this student, I said, well, let's leave it on. It's a little bit of an investment, and with all things that, again, one of my sort of favorite lines is, I would rather have a student curse me because they're overburdened with choice and they have so many great options or just a lot of options. And the other thing is, again, every circumstance is going to be a little bit different. If a student is chasing need-based financial aid, then yeah, we want to make sure that there's a number of likely schools in there because that's going to be a great bet, especially if a student's chasing merit aid. And if a student gets a significant grant, the stock in that school might mysteriously rise quite a bit if they're out of pocket is going to be little to none to attend that school. Again, going back to everything that Stuart and I talked about earlier, we're looking for a fit. And this isn't to say that we downplay selectivity, but just because a school is selective doesn't mean just because a school is a little bit more accessible doesn't mean it's not a fantastic opportunity for the students. And again, we look at those numbers insofar as admissibility, but less so as far as, is this the right school for you?
Yeah, and I think, Mike, it's really easy to confuse selectivity with quality of program. There are so many fantastic programs out there with accessible admit rates. One of our collective frustrations, because we talk about it, is that there are about 2,000 accredited colleges in the U.S. and the Mercersburg College Office deals with about, what would you guys say? I'd say probably 120 of them, right? 120, maybe 130 on a generous year.
Yeah, schools that get more than 2 applications, it's probably about that.
Yeah, so we are talking about the very, very top of the mountain, right? And even to try to ease a kid down a little bit to a little bit easier slope can be really hard work. I'm thinking of a family last year. We had a fantastic list created. We had great options at every level of selectivity. And then over the summer, and everybody was doing this when I called them on it, all of the likely schools disappeared off the list, right? They were deleted kind of quietly over the summer. Then when I revisited the list with the student in September, I said, wait a second, these are all reach and far reach schools. What happened? And trying to, again, get the families to understand that there are so many colleges that are dying to do business with Mercersburg graduates. Truly. So I don't know where I was going with that, other than that I really hope 11th grade parents out there will be open-minded. And if I say Wofford University, your eyes don't roll back in your head, because that's a great place that I have been unable to get anybody to look seriously at in the last couple of years. For example, there are others.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that we do sit down with our students to assess their interest levels at various points in the process, right? And so I will often tell my students, we're generally looking at this as a tiered system of interest. So I discourage my students from rank ordering their list because the distinction between the 4th and 5th choice might be far more significant than the distinction between the 1st and 2nd choice. And so I'm asking my students to think about the schools that they have a high level of interest in, a medium level of interest in, and perhaps a low level of interest in. And if they articulate a low level of interest, I challenge them to consider why it is that they would choose to submit an application.
Yeah.
There are reasons why they would choose to do so. Perhaps it's because it is an in-state institution where it is going to be more affordable over the course of a 4-year college education. That's a perfectly good reason to include a school with a low level of interest on the list. But if the student is identifying, we look for patterns, right? If a student is identifying only their likely options as being a low level of interest, I will begin to engage a student in a conversation about that, and to help them and to help me understand what their priorities are and what they're coming into that conversation with. And if they truly can provide an explanation for why it is that their interest is limited, we work together to find viable alternatives, schools at which their admission will be likely that might perhaps be a better fit for that student based on what it is that they're looking for from their college experience. And we do that early so that we have time to adjust and recalibrate expectations if needed.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, as a parent, I know how hard this can be because I went through it last year. And, you know, in the end, I could get my daughter really interested in one school, right? And her counselor failed miserably to engage her in a variety of schools. And, you know, I think we were very fortunate. We had the likely schools on the list, but boy, she just wasn't having it. And so we get it. we do get it, but you know, it's a process rather than a one meeting solution.
I did think her counselor did outstanding work.
Yeah, you can redeem yourself with daughter number 2 in a couple of years.
Yes, yes. You know, it is interesting to think about the impact, as we think about interest levels, the impact of college visits, getting onto campus and really developing a relationship with that school. I do think it's harder for some students to really identify their level of interest without having had that opportunity. So, Austin, you know, are college campuses allowing students onto campus to tour at this point? And you know, what do we know about when students might have the opportunity to do that?
Right. Well, it's funny because for the parents in the room, one of the things that we've been doing for the last couple of Sundays and what was it, Wednesday or Thursday nights, was that Mercersburg was part of a consortium of Pennsylvania schools that was hosting a virtual college fair. And these are all schools that we are going to have applications in with a range of selectivity. Some of the questions we asked was, and it was fairly typical, you know, are you on campus? Most people said no. It's interesting because there's a number of schools that have either said directly or sort of intimated one of the things they would really, really like to do, and again, it depends on the state, it depends on their location, is possibly either over Thanksgiving or over Christmas, open up for some tours.
Yep.
And again, this is going to be look at the shiny buildings. This is not going to be go sit in a class, go do that. And again, in this day and age, you know, what we're really sort of striving for is, you know, the old maxim of 60 or 70% of something is a lot better than 100% of nothing. You know, schools have really, really, really bent over backwards just to get as much content as they can online, just to sort of represent the student experience. And again, you know, understand what these are. These are marketing videos, but at the same time, this doesn't mean they're false, and it doesn't mean they're disingenuous. The other thing is what schools have been really, really good at is regularly hosting panels. And so a lot of the stuff that traditionally would be done in person, you know, is now being done electronically, which, I mean, everyone in the room knows is not ideal, but it's better than nothing. And again, what we want students to do is just find out information about the schools. With the visits, that yes, we hope Thanksgiving will be an opportunity. Christmas might be an opportunity. You know, the funny thing is too, is with a lot of schools that I'm hearing, they're not having a spring break, which again would be a great opportunity. But if we sort of leapfrog ahead, that we're also looking at sort of May and June as schools wrap up, which, I mean, for the 11th graders is a lot better. It's a challenge for the seniors. It really is.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that the campuses are somewhat open by April, right? Because April for our seniors, that's traditionally the month where they have all of their responses in hand. The deposits, you know, the universal deposit deadline is May 1st. And so traditionally colleges have had their accepted student days, they've had their programming, their open classes, that's all happened in April. And so I'm really hoping that colleges can get back on track and offer that to this year's senior class, because many of them will be getting onto campuses for the first time and treating those April visits
But I think
I was
perhaps
gonna say, is he frozen?
it may have frozen. So I'm going to actually jump in here. I found it entertaining. I had a conversation with one of our college reps at our virtual fair over the weekend about this very topic. And she said that she had actually, shortly after their campus closed, hosted a number of families on campus for a vehicle tour. She had them on speakerphone on her cell phone while driving them. They were in the car behind, driving them through campus and trying to introduce them to the lay of the land. And certainly it's not an ideal way to experience the campus tour, but you know, it's colleges are getting creative in the ways that they're allowing students to engage. And I think they'll continue to do so that students can make more informed decisions for our 11th graders eventually where to apply, and for our seniors eventually where to enroll. Austin, this is a question that I feel like was written for you. Will we help students consider and apply to international universities? St. Andrews was referenced, but can you talk about the types of support that we provide for students who are maybe looking to study outside the U.S.?
Sure. Yes. I mean, St. Andrews, that's very straightforward. I mean, Stuart and I were just talking about a UCAS application today that, and just so the folks who are listening know, we talked about the other night with international families. The country that probably has the highest number of applications outside of the United States is Canada. You know, which are great opportunities. Everything from an educational standpoint aligns very closely with the United States. The other thing is, and I speak for the entire office, all of us have had students that are interested in international universities. Whatever they want to do, we'll support it. And I'm just sort of thinking off the top of my head, every year we'll have certainly a trickle of interest, and usually this will roll out to a couple of applications to UK schools. We are going to have people looking at European schools. We're going to have people looking at American universities in Europe. Increasingly, we have students from Japan who are looking at their home universities. And you know, I would say the same thing with students coming from Mexico. You know, again, we're going to do a full search. You know, but homeschools are part of on the list. And with all of this, we have experience with it. If we don't have experience with it, just get us early enough in the process and we can figure it out. But I mean, you know, again, this is kind of fun. It's always nice to mix it up a little bit.
If anybody's interested in Yonsei University in Seoul, you know, stay on the call and we can talk. I had to do that a few years ago. I've got a senior this year who is only looking at Canadian universities because of the value that they represent. They are world-class institutions, and they can be significantly less than a typical American university. And then speaking of St. Andrews, I've got one of my seniors from last year's group is a first-year student studying history at St. Andrews. So as Austin said, that is a very familiar application for us.
Stuart, we had a question come in that was asking for clarification about test scores and test score submission and what it means to be on target or in profile. So are we thinking about the middle 50 percentile? You know,
right.
It's identify whether it was actually on target or in profile.
Yeah. So colleges, you know, obviously they're not going to say, hey, listen, anything above a 28 works, and anything below a 20, this is an ACT score, for example, right? Or an SAT, anything below a 1420 is going to be a no-go, and anything above a 1420 is going to be great. They speak in terms of a range of scores. And so, you know, the traditional kind of phrase is the middle 50%. You know, where do the scores fall right in the middle? And I was talking to a student about this yesterday who was very anxious about submitting schools to a highly selective school. And I went back and I just checked my notes on the university and I said, listen, your scores actually fall directly in the middle 50%. So submit them. You know, you are on profile. So by on profile, we mean, do the scores that student match with what the school is saying? Hey, here's our our sweet spot. Yes, we get scores that are higher than this, and of course we get scores that are lower than this, and it doesn't mean that we're just accepting the higher range, but that's the work we're doing in the office to see if scores are matching up with a university's profile.
Yeah, we meet with our seniors again on Monday in our senior seminar, and part of that, the agenda for Monday, is to help students come to some common understanding. And a lot of that work is going to be done individually, of course, as we're helping students in the context of their list and with their test scores make those decisions in a thoughtful way. The senior seminar has provided a really wonderful opportunity for us to kind of provide some broad perspective as it regards some of those decisions. So they have the context, they have the foundation in place from which to make some of those nuanced and maybe more difficult decisions. Austin, one thing we haven't actually talked much about is financial aid. And, you know, in thinking about the criteria for fit and defining fit, financial aid is often a significant consideration. Earlier in the process, what advice would you give to a family, and what support do we provide to help families assess the financial viability of their college list?
Very important point. I mean, a couple of things is with the students I meet with, if the families are going to be looking for and certainly hunting for financial aid, the sooner in the process we can know this, that's very, very helpful. And again, this doesn't change things substantially, but all of that said, that there are schools that are historically much better with financial aid. From the family's perspective, and again, the tools that I'm about to share with you, we use the best ones in the site, and it's called My Intuition. And this uses metadata, and there are, oh gosh, a couple of hundred schools in it, and it's most of the schools that our students will apply to. And you have to put in, I think it's 6 or 8 different data points. And I've spoken with people in financial aid offices at colleges, and for them, they're astonished. They say it's eerily accurate. And so My Intuition is a great place to start. Every single college in the country, if you dig deeply enough, has a net price calculator embedded somewhere on their website. They're required to. And again, if you're trying to get a ballpark sense of cost, again, go to the net price calculator. And this is going to ask for some specific inputs. Those are typically income and assets. And again, it will give you not a pinpoint. Some schools have it a little bit more dialed, but that's going to give you a sense of what you're asked to pay. And then from an office standpoint, one of the things that we rolled out this year that I think has been fantastic is College Kickstart. And again, this has got a very sort of carefully calibrated widget that what it will say it will say, here are schools that are very, very good at merit aid. Here are schools that are very, very good at need-based aid. And so as far as the great financial aid picture, with all these things, they're guides. This is going to help us just get as complete a picture about financial aid. I mean, some of the easy stuff is, you know, let's look at in-state schools and in-state options. If you live in the state of Virginia, if you live in the state of Maryland, if you live in the state of Pennsylvania, there are some really strong options, and there's some nice opportunities there. And again, you know, we urge families to do their homework on this and really collaborate with them on this. If there's a school that's on the list that we feel pretty strongly about does not do a good job with financial aid, we're going to be really clear about that. Yeah. And so again, with all these things, you know, it's a partnership, and especially if you're seeking aid, you know, it's research, and the more research you do, sort of the better position you're going to put yourself and your student in, you know, both with schools they can get into, schools that are going to meet full demonstrated need. I mean, there's a variety of things, but you know, as counselors, we're happy to have these conversations. We really are.
And I would say very generally, I think families who know that financial aid is going to be a critical factor should cast the net a little wider. Right, because I think as with you know, the basic choice, you want options, and so sometimes early decision can be that can be tough because you're really only going to look at one financial aid offer. But if you apply EA and you apply regular decision, you're going to be able to shop around and compare 4, 5, 6 different offers. And, Austin mentioned, demonstrated need. Very few colleges in this country meet 100% of demonstrated need. And I think to jump on what he said about College Kickstart, I've been so impressed with the way that Kickstart can give you the nuances in financial aid policy at each of the universities. They meet 80% of demonstrated need. They meet 100%, because the last thing we want is one of our families getting what we call gapped, where, let's say the paperwork says that, they should be getting an award package of $50,000 to make college work. And then the offer comes in from the school and it's $30,000. And there's this $20,000 gap, and the family's looking at us saying, what do we do? That can be a tough position, and we don't want our students taking on a ton of debt over the course of 4 years to finance that. So have those conversations early, cast a wider net, make use of the functionality of programs like College Kickstart that can right away paint that financial picture for you and let you know whether that's going to be a viable option at the other end of the process.
Yeah, I want to note that I did add the link to My Intuition to the chat for any family who is interested in leveraging that tool. You'll note that the number of schools that subscribe to My Intuition is limited, but there's still great value in the tool insofar as it allows you to compare and contrast calculated or projected awards at the various schools that you might consider. So it's a wonderful resource, and I highly encourage, as Austin has, anyone who is planning to go through the process of applying for financial aid to make use of that resource. And we certainly introduce our students to College Kickstart in the late in the winter term of their 11th grade year, and we'll begin having conversations providing context for the data that College Kickstart provides at that point in time as well. If a student thinks they want to try to play a sport in college, the question is, should they work with their coach or with their college counselor first? And I'll actually take this to start. I think it's both. In order, an athlete to define fit through this process has to take into consideration a variety of different factors beyond the sport that they play. And that would include their academic profile in schools that might be a reasonably strong fit academically as well. So we're really fortunate to be a part of a community in which we collaborate frequently. And there are many coaches across campus who are engaged in the process of supporting students through the recruitment process. And so, I'm constantly back and forth with a number of coaches and helping the student to identify schools where they might attend a prospect day, how they might engage a college coach in meaningful conversation. And I think it's a collaborative effort. So, I think it's important for the student to speak with the coach to get an understanding of what their prospects for playing a particular sport in college are. And perhaps that is the starting point, but it's really important actually that the student include both the college counselor and the coach in the conversation early in the process, so that we can all be in alignment in working toward the same goals and helping to support that student in that way.
I would say we're very comfortable helping athletes assess fit and get recruited. In fact, I was thinking the other night, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think every single one of us in the office was a college athlete. Is that right? Did Rachel run in college?
She did.
Okay, so every single one of us was a college athlete. So, there's going to be somebody who can handle that question in the office.
Yeah, it's actually, it's a part of the process that I enjoy. It can be really complicated and nuanced at times. Yeah. There are certain pressures on our prospective athletes that other students may not experience or may not feel. But I think that provides a real opportunity for meaningful reflection and growth. And it can actually be a really exciting time for those students. So not only do I feel comfortable doing that, but I actually really enjoy supporting our prospective athletes because there's just so much joy in that process too. So we've made reference to College Kickstart multiple times, and there's a question about parent access to College Kickstart. There isn't actually a parent portal in College Kickstart, but students do have access And we encourage our students to share information with and to review that information together with their parents. And we will also provide College Kickstart allows us to put together what's called a college plan summary, which is really data rich and provides all the information that we've made reference to with regard to financial aid trends and deadlines, application deadlines and key application requirements. They will even make recommendations in terms of when students might apply where, which of course we are really carefully curating and helping students to interpret. So we provide those reports. Right now, we've done so in the spring for our 11th graders, and we're beginning to provide those reports again for the same cohort of students this fall as a means of confirming their plans through the early rounds and trying to assess what their plans will likely be through the regular decision rounds as well.
Yeah. And for our 11th grade parents, I would just add that College Kickstart will not function until there is a first draft of a college list. You can't go in and just start typing in schools and getting the dirt on them. You have to have a range of schools listed. So that's why the functionality of that program really isn't going to come into play until we're having, that second round meeting with a student and starting to really shape that first iteration of a college list.
All right, well, we are nearing time, and it appears that our questions have been asked. If you do have any last minute questions, certainly feel free to enter them in the Q&A feature. But Stuart, Austin, I wonder if there are any parting words of wisdom that you would like to offer either our 11th grade or 12th grade parents, or perhaps wisdom that might apply to both.
Gosh, wow.
No pressure, Stuart, go ahead.
Yeah, senior parents, I would say just please stay in touch. This is a critical time in the process. There are certainly deadlines beyond what's coming up in November, and we want to make sure that we are working with you and communicating with you about the totality of the plan and not just what's happening in the next 3 weeks. And with the 11th graders, it's really fun in the winter and the spring to begin to shape the process. And so that's when it can be really helpful to meet with us, have that phone call or that Zoom call, and let us know what the family priorities are, the family issues, the concerns. The more that we know about a family's hopes and dreams, the more dialed in that search process can be for a student.
Yeah, I mean, everything Stuart said is just, be engaged with your student as they go through the process. And I will say, as a parent, ask the questions, tell me about this school. What's interesting about this school? What do you like about this school? And I realize that 11th and 12th grade students are not always they're communicative with everyone else, but not always their families. But start having those conversations. I always found road trips was a great time when you're just trapped in the car. That was a nice time to talk about some of this stuff, and talk to your students. And as much as you can do, try and engage them in the process. And it doesn't necessarily need to be heavy-handed. It's a little bit of sort of, what's happening in the process, what's interesting, what's fun, what did you find out that you didn't know before, things like that. And just start the conversation. And the second part about this is that I will speak for the entire office. I had this one parent who said, "Oh, you must think I'm such a pest. I'm always asking questions," and not at all, because these were thoughtful questions. And this was a parent who wanted just to, make sure that they understood how the process went. And those are things that I will answer all day. And for the families that work with me, they know that I'm the world's slowest typist. So if I'm going after about 3 lines, I'm going to say, this is a great chance for a phone call, and I'm happy to engage. So let's do that. But again, that this is everyone. It is counselors, it's students, and it's families, and that's the way it should be.
I actually had one of the most meaningful conversations with my daughter when she was trapped in the car with me between visits, and we had just gone to a school that she told me she was not interested in before we even opened the door in the parking lot. And we were driving, and and she said to me, "Hey, I know that you want me to be excited about all of these schools, but I'm just not." And I said, "Oh, tell me more about that. This was spring break of her 11th grade year. And she said, I just don't feel ready. This just makes me sad. And I said, well, why does it make you sad? It's supposed to be exciting. And she said, well, it just means that my Mercersburg experience is almost over and I got to find a new school. And I don't want to make new friends and I don't want to have to find new things to do. And I don't want to reinvent myself. And she just kind of went off. And I realized that, I was forcing it because I'm in the business and I knew what we should be doing. And I did not take the time to appreciate that developmentally or probably just emotionally, she wasn't ready. And so I relayed the conversation to my wife, who just looked at me and said, stop talking about it. No more visits, no more appointments. Let her come to you, let her come to us. And that's when we'll know that she's ready. And sure enough, right, about 6 weeks later, she sat down on the couch apropos of nothing and said, so when's our next visit? And after that, she was engaged, right? She asked the question, she enjoyed the tour, she found the school that she's at tonight. But boy, did I boot the first few months of the process. So talk to your kids, right? Follow Austin's advice, have those conversations.
Yeah, and I'm going to add that, I said it in my video update to our senior parents last week, but this is truly a masterclass in project management. And for as stressful and as difficult and as high as the stakes might seem at times through this process, I try never to lose sight of the fact that our students are amazing and are quite frankly navigating what is such a challenging process in such a thoughtful and mature way so often. And so, I work to give them the benefit of the doubt and to support them. And quite frankly, for our senior class, a few weeks from now, I will be congratulating them and celebrating their accomplishment because it truly means something when a student hits the submit button. And I hope that, as a community beyond this office, we're all able to rally behind and celebrate that accomplishment because it's truly astounding what our students are able to do through the fall term of their senior year in particular, but from the beginning of this process. So I have great pride in our students and I'm just so excited for them. And I hope that we all can be too. So with that, I would like to note that tomorrow evening, we will host the final of our 4 panel events. We will have Deans of Enrollment from Bates College, Georgia Institute of Technology, and Washington University in St. Louis. We're very much excited to benefit from their expertise. I have included in the chat a link to the registration for that webinar. We strongly encourage you to join us. And in the meantime, should you have any follow-up questions or concerns as a result of any of the information that's been provided tonight, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office, be it to your college counselor directly, or quite frankly, to anyone in the office. We are available and most happy to respond to those questions and concerns. So thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.